Author's note. Stupidly long, and it gets really weird from here on out. Thank you for sticking with me thus far, and listening to my story. This was the hardest part to write, so I appreciate everyone's patience. I'm trying to avoid overlong posts, as this experience and my recounting of it starts coming to its end. I've heard a lot of amazing insight from the community, and even more unanswered questions as well. Some people have mentioned seeing the same symbol, both in comments and in private PMs. I'm not sure what this means, but if what they're saying is true, and more people have seen it, I'm afraid that what I did at the end of my story may not have worked the way I thought it did. More on that in the next post. Stay safe, everyone. Are you ready? My head rested against Jay's crossed ankles, eyes staring up at the sky beyond her head. It was a gorgeous day. Crystal blue skies and wisps of white cotton clouds danced past the tops of the trees straight above me. It was actually warm for the first time in a long time. Everyone around me in the circle seemed lit in soft fire as the afternoon sunlight broke through the pine trees and scattered like liquid gold to the forest floor beneath. I took it all in for a second, and then sucked in a breath, shutting my eyes. Ready. 7 doors, 7 doors, 7 doors. I was nervous. I had no idea how I was ever going to relax enough to slip into the altered state I had become so familiar with at this point. But suddenly, it was happening. I sank, my vision receding into darkness, and the voices of the girls seemed to come from far away, as if I had dropped underwater. I shivered, and when I faintly heard Jay ask, "What do you see?" I opened my eyes. I was in a huge, expansive field. The sky, the tall grass that brushed against my jeans, the few small birds in the sky, all were gray, like I had stepped into an old black and white movie. All color leached from everything, including, as I looked down at myself, me. And when I raised my eyes, I nearly jumped. A sharp gasp escaped my lips, and from very, very far away I could hear Jay's voice. "What is it?" "I'm surrounded," I whispered. "They're all around me." They stood on 4 legs, soft sable fur glimmering in the dull gray light. Bristling antlers towered towards the sky, ending in wickedly sharp points tipped dark with some unknown glimmering liquid. They looked like elk, but larger, and in the center of each velvety forehead opened a third eye, unblinking and staring. They surrounded me in a circle, and they were staring at me. "Jay," I whispered. "Jay, what do I do?" "Just move very slowly, and don't piss them off, please. We've got enough shit to worry about right now without adding to it." I took a few hesitant steps towards one edge of the circle. The elk seemed disinclined to move, but as I approached, almost touching one of them, it shifted to the side slowly to allow me to pass. The circle closed behind me, and I could feel the weight of their enormous bodies, antlers clicking as they tapped against one another, moving in unison. Ahead, in the distance, I could see the tree line of a forest, and before that tree line, a huge building towered, rows of smaller trees laid out across its front lawn like a small orchard. It reminded me of those plantation houses in the South, elaborate and impressive in its physicality, but also wilting, with crumbling shingles and dark moss claiming the corners of ceilings and the base of columns. In the background, I started hearing a low, almost imperceptible noise, the low rumbling of a far-off earthquake, and a softer chopping noise layered over the top. I described it all to Jay as I began walking forward through the tall grass, the mansion looming up ahead of me. The low rumbling sound encroached on the edge of my hearing. It was always there, subversive and barely loud enough to pick up, but for some reason the hairs had been standing up on my arms the moment I opened my eyes in the field. As I finished describing the scene for the others, I heard a faint sound coming from the building ahead of me. It sounded like a phrase, like someone was repeating something over and over, but at the end of the jumble of words I could distinctly make out one syllable. Cat. Fuck. Guys, I whispered. I think I hear Elia's voice. I took off in a light jog, booking it through high grass that slapped against my legs as I ran. Surprisingly, the herd of elk followed. They kept a medium distance behind me, but they moved like a silent tide over the field, spreading out behind me in a wall of antlers and muscle. As I approached the house, they fell back, marking a line about 50 feet from the front entrance with their bodies. They fell still, silently watching me as I approached the huge front porch. The windows were dark. I couldn't see anything beyond the faded, cracked panes of glass. No sign or indication of what lay inside, waiting for me. The voice was a little stronger, yet I still struggled to make out the entire phrase. I simply heard a jumble of words followed by cat repeated over and over in discordant sing-song melody. Now that I was closer, I was even more certain that it sounded like Elia. There's nothing on the porch, I whispered. It's bare. No furniture, nothing. As I approached the door, I balked. The front door loomed dark and heavy against the white wooden building, and I knew immediately that it was the at once familiar and dreaded black door. Yet, something about it had changed. I swallowed and stepped forward cautiously, the porch creaking softly under my weight. The large symbol in the middle of the door was different from what Loran and Elia had described. There was still a circle, a long horizontal line, and 2 lines beneath it, but where the third and lowest line had cut across the bottom of the circle, now it was replaced with a long outline of an ovoid shape, with a solid circle in the center of that shape. And as I looked, something dark stained the white wood wall next to the door. Maybe I was seeing things or recognizing a pattern where there wasn't any, but it looked like there was a handprint against the door frame, a dark central palm with long, ragged-looking fingers stretching out, reaching in towards the doorknob. My eyes took it in, and that keening, rumbling noise at the edge of my hearing seemed to intensify, filling my eardrums. I found my right hand lifting, slowly reaching out towards that handprint, my limbs shaking, my body shaking, my organs and my heart and my lungs rumbling and quivering and becoming that noise, until I heard nothing else and saw nothing else as I reached, palm desperately wanting to press into the blackness of its hand. Pain exploded on the side of my body, and I was launched sideways, sprawling over the porch, wrists and head slapping against the wood like a rag doll. One of the members of the elk herd had climbed the porch and stood towering over me, antlers shadowed against the gray sky behind him. It stared down at me as I gasped for breath on the ground, ice in my lungs, my head bursting with pain and my ribs bruised. Jay's voice seemed to whisper from far away. What happened? Fuck. Nothing. I just need to get out of here. Fast. The elk snorted at me, and I perceived a contemptuous note in its heavy breath before it backed off the porch and stood in the grass in front of the mansion, watching me impassively. I scrambled to my feet and approached the door, keeping my eyes off the grotesque handprint and reaching for the doorknob. I noticed with trepidation the names of all my friends carved into the wood, and at the top of the circle where Elia had claimed her name had been, I now saw the name Catherine. I opened the door. The mansion expanded around me, massive. The ceiling was as high as a cathedral, with arching points and angled apexes, nothing at all like what it might have looked from the outside. Everything was pale, white, but there was an insidious darkness that hung heavy, coalescing in every nook and cranny and settling, as if waiting for me to do something. Because of the unique architecture, there were corners everywhere, not just in the walls, but on the ceiling as it sloped and dipped, arched and folded, and met itself again in high peaks, pointed up towards the sky and beyond. The massive space was decorated with strange furniture unidentifiable to me, and again there seemed to be extra edges to things, as if I were looking at one of those magic eye pictures where illusions pop out of flat spaces. I had a headache immediately as my eyes tried to make sense of it all, and couldn't. There were 2 staircases lining the walls, leading up to a second-floor balcony and dark hallways beyond. Ahead of me at the far end of the large entryway seemed to be a huge, looming structure, a structure that I felt an immediate aversion to. A sick, gut-deep revulsion shook through me every time my eyes tried to focus on it. It seemed a tangled mess of angles and shapes that moved with slow, undulating purpose out of the corner of my eye. Yet when I grew close to looking at it, it went still. An indecipherable statue in an indecipherable room. At its base, hunched over in a curled ball, was someone that looked like Elia. "Jay, I see Elia! Jesus, she's still in here!" I kept my eyes on her form, refusing to look at the large structure she was huddled in front of any longer. I'm moving towards her. Maybe if I get her out of here, this whole thing will be over. A garbled whisper hissed in my ear. It sounded like Jay, but it was as if she were talking over a malfunctioning walkie-talkie and I could only make out every other word. "Careful," I heard through the static. "Elia," I whispered sharply as I got closer. "Elia, it's Kat." She was muttering to herself, unintelligible words interspersed with what sounded like my name. I inched closer towards her, fingers reaching out to grasp her shoulder. If I could just get her out of here, get back to the clearing, have Jay pull us out. My fingers touched her shoulder just as her muttered words finally unjumbled and became clear. Curiosity killed the cat. She uncurled then and turned to look back at me. It was Elia's face, but her eyes were fathomless, completely black. Not empty, but filled with a vastness and an unending void so deep that it terrified me. It felt like looking at a moonless night sky, but instead of standing grounded on my backyard patio, I had stepped out beyond the sky, beyond the stars and planets, as if everything recognizable and warm was behind me, and I was right on the edge where only the blackness remained. I stared at it, and it stared right back. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, and she slowly stood up to face me. She kept repeating the phrase, "Curiosity killed the cat," and as she straightened onto her feet, she cocked her head to the side as if listening to something far off. But then she kept going, her head bending further and further to the side until I was sure her neck would snap, and it still kept going, turning around in a horrifying slow-motion circle, those eyes staring at me until her head had turned all the way around, and her chin pointed up towards the ceiling while her long hair dangled down the front of her body. Her mouth opened wide, the sentient vastness of the abyss beyond the cavern of her mouth, and she screamed, multiple voices crying in an agony and rage that rocked me to my core. I ran. I've never felt such blinding terror before, or since, There was no reason, no plan, no strategy to where I was going. I simply threw myself forward into any available empty space that would take me, feet pounding against white wooden floorboards as I sprinted towards the front of the building. The black door slammed shut as I reached it, and I let out a strangled, helpless cry, trying the knob once before letting go as the door refused to budge. I turned and ran for the stairs, Elia's twisted, shuddering shape making its way towards me in a stuttering half-step. Up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, legs and lungs burning. My eyes watered and my vision blurred. I heard a horrible crunch as I reached the top of the stairs, and I turned to look behind me. Elia's form had reached the bottom step, and she had fallen forward, catching herself on her arms, limbs lengthening in horrible proportions as she began crawling up each step with unearthly speed, her horribly turned head wobbling back and forth in grotesque fashion. Her mouth was still wide open, still screaming wordlessly at my retreating form, and I turned and sprinted down the dark hallway. The ceiling was high, shadows stretching above me into nothingness. I threw myself around the corner at the end of the hall, only to find another stretch of hallway in front of me. With Elia close behind, I ran, further into the darkness, Elia's enraged screams echoing around me. The rumbling background sound had grown more intense, pulsating through me and vibrating my bones as I bounced off walls and skidded around corners, gasping for breath. No matter how many bursts of speed I put on, how many times I thought I'd lose her, she was soon on my trail again, crawling like some unearthly animal, long legs and arms stretching, snapping forward. I glanced behind me, terror rising anew as I saw her skid around the corner I'd just cleared. And as my head turned from the corner of my eye, I saw a glimpse of color, a flash of deep red in the darkness. To my right, down a side hallway, was the red door. I should have questioned it, but there was no time. I hurtled towards it, Elia grabbing at my heels, and reached out for the doorknob, turning it in an instant and shoving it open. Light poured through the door, illuminating the hallway, and as I turned to slam the door shut, I caught a glimpse of Elia. She was crawling on the ceiling, hands and feet gripping the darkened wood as her face, now right side up because of the angle, hung down, almost level with my own, her mouth split into a wicked grin. Curiosity killed the... I slammed the door shut, leaning against it hard. Thump! The door shook violently, rattling against my back. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed harder against it, lips clamped together to stifle my own cries. Thump, thump, thump! Go away, go away, go away! After a few moments, the door finally fell still. All sound from the other side ceased. I stood drenched in sweat and gasping for breath in the golden gilt courtyard we always entered when we stepped through the red door in the past. Impossibly tall buildings rose high above me, glittering in the light of a deep crimson sunset. The air was cooling, but the sparkling bricks and walls around me radiated the ambient heat of a long, hot day coming to a close. "Jay," I said hoarsely, "Jay, can you hear me?" "Yes, God, finally. Are you okay? What's happening? You've been babbling nonsense and hyperventilating for the past 5 minutes. I was about to send someone to call 911. Jay. Elia, she's..." A rush of hot wind tussled my hair, caressing my face. A shadow passed over the courtyard, and I quailed, looking up as a dark shape suddenly dropped down from the air onto the cobbled pavement in front of me. An owl, huge, almost as tall as me, scrabbled its talons against the gilt stonework. It cocked its head at me once, twice, and then seemed to shiver, shake out its feathers, twitching uncomfortably, and then a woman's head unfurled, standing tall, much taller than me, the feathers of the owl settling and draping over her body like a fine gown. She folded a pair of wings against her back, Her eyes were impossibly large, nearly filled with luminescent red irises shot with gold, huge unchanging black pupils swallowing the middle. Cat, what is it? What do you see? Her crimson lips curled in a smile. Her voice was otherworldly, intense, so uncanny that it raised the hairs on the back of my neck the moment she spoke. I've been waiting for you.